Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Mem. We started this issue of Shemitah, and we're going to continue with it about someone, if you remember, the Mishnah had said on Lamed Tet, if you buy a lulav from Chaveiro b'Shvi'it, which Rashi explained to be an Ama Aretz, based on the Gemara's interpretation, if you buy from someone who doesn't necessarily keep halachot of Shemitah properly, noten lo etrog b'matana, he has to give you the etrog as a gift because you cannot buy it on the Shnat Shemitah. And what's the reason? The reason is that when you buy it, you're basically giving him money that's going to have the Kedusha of Shvi'it. When you buy or sell Perot Shvi'it, the money used to purchase the fruits also ends up with sanctity. Besides that the fruits are sanctified, also the money gets sanctified. And then they won't use it properly, because remember, what happens with sanctified money? Same thing as the fruits. They can only be used for certain uses. And today we'll see maybe there's a bit of a different opinion about this, but normally we say it's eating, drinking, anointing yourself, putting on creams, coloring, and for light for reading, okay, or for using for seeing. Okay, so now, we saw that it was just a problem with the etrog and not with the lulav, to which the Gemara said, why isn't it a problem with the lulav? So they say, because the etrog is a shishit that nichnas l'shvi. It's from the 6th year, right? That you're in the 7th year, but it was already budded in the 6th year. And that's why it goes by 6th year. It's not considered Shemitah. To which we said, why isn't the etrog like that? And then we said that, well, the etrog is an exception because the etrog goes batar lekita, based on when you pick it, like vegetables. And Rashi had said there, because anything that needs also water, watering system besides just natural rain, is considered a vegetable and not a fruit, and etrog fits into that category. However, the Gemara asked, really? But wait, doesn't Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, don't they both say that the etrog goes like trees when it comes to Shemitah? And their only debate was regarding the Maaser, which year of Maaser it is, goes by, according to Rabban Gamliel, goes after when you pick it. But for all other purposes, including Shemitah, it goes by when it budded, which would be just like the lulav, in which case it shouldn't be a problem. You should say the etrog was still from the previous year, shouldn't be an issue. So my husband told me that when this year, it's the Shemitah year, they always make sure either to get etrogim from outside of Israel or from the 6th year. They pick them in the 6th year before, right, which they can do because it's not that long before. They pick them before the beginning of the year, and that way they avoid the problem. Whereas I assume that means that next year they have to make sure to pick it after Rosh Hashanah, which is right, and then not to make sure it's part of the 8th year, and basically just skip the whole 7th year of produce of etrogim that are in Israel. Or again, if you get it from outside of Israel, which there are places, he claims they get it from Turkey. Interesting that they grow etrogim there. So anyway, that's where they get it from, and that avoids the problem so that we don't have an issue with it. In any case, let's read on. So hu da'amal, so how does our Mishnah say that etrog is a problem? And lulav, right? And that lulav is not a problem. If lulav is not a problem, then etrog should also not be a problem, because they're both trees. So hu da'amal ki aitana detanya, the person who wrote our Mishnah must be holding, or the author of our Mishnah must be holding, Amar Rabbi Yossi, of the Tana of this Braita, which is Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, Av Tulmas He'i Mishum Chamishaz Kinim. Av Tulmas testified in the name of 5 elders. Etrog achar lekita l'maaser. When it comes to maaser, this sounds like Rabbi Eliezer. We hold by picking, the moment of picking for maaser. The Rabotenu Nimnu Ba'usha, and the rabbis, they got up in Usha and they voted, right? Usha was one of the centers after the destruction of the temple, and where the Sanhedrin sat and voted and said, Bein l'maaser, bein l'shvi'it, both for maaser and for Shemitah. Okay, so here you see that the rabbis took a vote and said, also for Shemitah purposes, we're going to go after the Lekita, the picking, which is what Rabbi Yossi says, which must be who the Tana of our Mishnah is holding by. To which the Gemara says there's a little bit of a problem with this Braita. Shvi'it man dechar shmei. They were only talking about Maaser in the beginning. Where did Shvi'it all of a sudden come into this? So they say, well, really, chisurim achasle v'haki katani. It's really as if it's missing words, and this is how it should read. Etrog achar lekita l'Maaser v'achar chanata l'shvi'it. Etrog goes by picking for Maaser and by budding for Shemitah. And then Rabotenu Nimnu Ba'usha, in other words, it really did talk about Shemitah in the beginning. And then the Rabotenu Nimnu Ba'usha V'amru etrog batar l'kita ben l'maaser ben l'shvi'it. Okay, so we've resolved that. New question. The lulav itself, there's a question about it. We said etrog goes by the picking, and the lulav goes by when it budded. That's why lulav is not a problem. So because it says that, it sounds like Tama de lulav bar shishita nichnas l'shvi'itu. Sounds like it's because lulav is 6th year going into 7. But hadish shvi'it kadosh amai. But it sounds like if it were actually a lulav from the Shemitah year, it would be a problem. It would be sanctified. But why? It seemed ba'almahu. It's just trees, right? There's food is one thing. Etrog is a food, but a lulav is just a tree. Nobody eats it. And therefore, it seemed we know that just wood doesn't have sanctification of the Shemitah year. How do we know this? Titanias, it says in a Braita, alei kanim va'alei gfanim. If you have leaves from reeds and leaves from vines, grapevines, shegivivan lechovah pnei hasadeh. You gather them for chovah. It's not exactly sure what chovah is. Some people say it's machavo, hiding. I think Rashi maybe is the one who says that. Chovah, so let's just assume it's lemachavo, right? Rashi says it, lashon machavo, which means to hide it, which doesn't really mean to hide it. It means to gather it and store it in your storage house. So you gather a lot of wood to store in your leaves from these trees to gather in your storage house, right? Which is like the lulav, it's leaves off of a tree that are not really edible. Liktan la'achila, so now it's all going to depend on for what purpose you gathered it. Now it's true you don't really eat these leaves. However, animals, it could be used for animal fodder. So if liktan la'achila, if you gathered it for purposes of an animal eating it, then this is all, again, it depends on your intent. Your intent becomes very critical. What did you intend it for? That's going to affect whether it has sanctity or not. So if you gathered it for your animal to eat, yesh b'hem shum kedushat shvi'it, well, then it has the sanctity of the Shemitah year because it's food, right? Remember, it's for you to eat and for your animals to eat. So that's going to have sanctity. But liktan la'etzim, but if you use it for wood to put in your fireplace, right, then it has no sanctity to it. So what do you say? What do you see here? If you didn't gather these leaves to eat them, they don't have kedushat shvi'it. So why are we assuming that the lulav is not a problem because it's the 6th year produce? Why don't we just, right, because it goes based on when it budded, why don't we just say simply, it doesn't have kedushat shvi'it at all because it's a tree. It's leaves from a tree, which don't have sanctity to it. To which the Gemara answers, Shane hatam da'amar kha. Now the reason there where it says liktan le'etzim doesn't have kedusha, it's because the verse said lachem le'ochla. This is the verse by Shemitah. It's for you to eat. Lachem dumia le'ochla. We see this many times. 2 words appear next to each other. We're going to say one is like the other. For you has to be any kind of, sounds like it's for you to eat. Now, it could have just said it's to eat. Why does it say for you to eat? For you to eat means it's for you for other uses as well, but only uses that are similar to eating. Okay, this goes to where we talked about that you can use it for certain purposes, not just for eating. What's unique about all those kind of purposes? So now we're going to learn. Meat, right? We said eating, drinking, or putting on your body like a moisturizer, coloring, and light. So they're all going to fall into this category. What's unique about eating? When you eat it, as you benefit from it, you destroy it, right? It's destroyed while you're benefiting. Whereas if you burn wood, what happens? First, it turns into coals. Then you benefit from it because then you cook something on it. But it's already destroyed before it becomes, right? As it becomes a coal, once it's a coal, the wood is destroyed. There is no wood anymore. So therefore, the benefit is after it's already burned. That you can't do with Shemitah produce. So now they ask the following question, but wait, there's wood that you use for lighting, right? Where you get oils from it and you use it for there's trees, I should say, not wood. There's trees that can be used for lighting, and therefore, right, you get olive oil, for example, and things like that, where hanatanu biyuran shaveh, right? I shouldn't say, right, it's not really that, right? It's shemen. Yeah, they say eitz shemen is, we keep talking about this eitz shemen. So they say, Rashi says, ha'etz atzmo madlikim bo laha'il, kemo ba'avukot. This is what they're saying. Sorry, I missed this. Eitzim de mashchan, in the Rashi Dibor Matchil, eitzim de mashchan, I forgot this what he said. When you light a torch, right, you can take wood and light it up on fire and use it for light. So at that point, you're benefiting as it's being destroyed. So that would be a case where you could use it. So why, if you gather this for wood, would we say that we're assuming that it's not going to be used in the same way as eating? And hana'atan, your benefit will be after it's already been destroyed. So they say, no, that's an exception because amarava stam eitzim lahasaka hemomdim. Most wood is used for burning. That's right, for burning for eating purposes. Not right. If you take the percentages of how much wood people gather and how much they use for these torches and how much they use for lighting their ovens and cooking, most of it is used for cooking. And therefore, we're going to say if you gathered it for wood, we're going to assume that you were using it for kindling and not for lighting for torches. And therefore, we're not going to assume that it has kedusha because you might use this in the same way that you use food, which is when you destroy it, you're also benefiting. No, we're going to go by the majority. This is classic in the Gemara where we follow majority use by the average person. Even if you might be using it for a different use, we're going to go by what the average person does. So that's the Gemara's conclusion. So again, where did we start? We said, why is the lulav considered that it has kedusha shvi to it when it really shouldn't? Okay, now here's the trick. The Gemara doesn't talk about this. You have to look at Rashi for this to understand, because what did we basically do? We brought a source that talked about wood collected for purposes of eating, fodder, which would have kedusha, versus collected for burning, which wouldn't. But what was the criteria? It will have sanctity if, when you use it, when you benefit from it, you're destroying it. Now, what's the typical use for a lulav? So Rashi tells us that the typical use for a lulav, actually saw this before, is for sweeping. Remember, they talked about the egged and binding, right? Is the binding of the lulav like binding the different parts in a broom? The lulav was used for a broom, which makes sense, right? It's kind of broom-like. Because it was used for sweeping, when you sweep, you benefit from the fact that you've swept, even though you don't exactly enjoy sweeping, but you benefit from the fact that you swept. And at the same time, you're destroying, right? This is depreciation of objects. You're destroying the broom because every time you use it, it gets worse. And right, and let's imagine they're fresh lulav or dried out lulav leaves, right? They're going to go bad after some time and they get very dirty. So basically, as you use it, you're destroying it, and therefore it falls into the category of kedushat shvit. So it does have sanctity to it because it is similar in that way to eating. Okay. Now comes the tricky part of our Gemara, or the more complicated part of today's daf. Eitzim hasaka tanai. So now they say wood for burning is a machloket tanaim. Now there's two things we said about wood for burning. One is that wood for burning would not have sanctity, kedushat shvit, but that's eitzim dehasaka, as we would say. Eitzim lehasaka is the last line we just said. Rava said, stam eitzim, the typical wood normally is used for burning. So it sounds like from the Gemara, the simple reading, that whether what Rava said, that most trees are used for burning, that's a machloket tanaim, to which Rashi says that really can't be the girsa. So if you look at Rashi, it's from the 6th wide line or 7th wide line, hey gimel, eitzim dehasaka tanai. Notice he changes it to dehasaka. Eitzim of burning. What's the difference? Eitzim lehasaka means trees that or wood that is meant for burning, which would be Rava's line, that eitzim are meant for burning generally. But eitzim dehasaka, wood for burning, meaning whether you gathered it for food or you gathered it for burning, is tanaihi. And he basically says we're talking about the earlier point, which was what we said before, that eitzim that you gather for food would have sanctity, but if you gather them for wood purposes, the leaves you gather for burning, they would not have sanctity to them at all, shmita sanctity. Okay. That's what Rashi is going to say is the machloket, and that's how we're going to read the Gemara. But what I wanted to read you was the end of Rashi here, which is very interesting. He says, if you look at the words, Va'ani shamati merabotai shahayu gorsim, okay, it's further down halfway through that Rashi. I heard from my rabbis that they had the version, ustam etzim lahasakan ninhu tenai. They had the version that Rava's line, that the average tree is used for burning as a machloka tanaim. And then he says, and in fact, that's what I see in front of me in all the manuscripts I have. I tried in my youth to try with everything I had in my arsenal of learning to figure out how to make that girsa make any sense. And I couldn't figure it out. And then I found a different version, right? It's just great that Rashi talks about this. I found a different version, in the book with the handwriting of Rabbeinu Gershon ben Yehuda, Menuchato Kavod, right? May he blessed it, may his, rest in peace. I saw this version that I'm quoting written in their books without any, edits on it to it. And it seems that this is the right text. So basically, you see Rashi struggling to figure it out, and eventually he finds a different girsa, and that helps him. And it's important to know because sometimes there's Gemaras that really don't make sense. And if you look in old manuscripts, right, our text, our printed edition doesn't have all the different manuscripts. And the one the one that got printed it was a little bit random which one got printed. It was whatever one the printing press had in their hands, and they wanted to get the books printed, and they kind of printed it quickly, but they did some work and editing work, but they didn't do a good serious study the way people nowadays do, where there's editions like the Diktukei Sofrim, and you can find this online also now in the National Library of Israel, different versions of the text. Okay, Diktukei Sofrim is a book, like a giant 2-volume book with all different versions of different manuscripts. So this is something that's very helpful sometimes when you have a sugya that doesn't really make sense. It can help you figure out maybe you really have the wrong text. So now we're going to start and understand what the machloket tanaim is. Ditanya. It says in a Braita. Now it'll take some time to get there. First thing you have to get in your head clear so you don't get confused between is, here we were talking about wood or leaves, actually, leaves from a tree that could be used for fodder, but usually are not, right? And it depended what you gather them for. If you gather them for fodder, they would have kedusha. If you gather them for some other reason, they wouldn't. That's different from fruits. Fruits are always going to have sanctity. And that's not the topic of this Braita, so hold off till we see the comparison. This Braita is talking about peirot shvi'it, real, legit, no matter what. Fruits from a Shemitah, that grew in the Shemitah year, right, or budded in the Shemitah year, other than the etrog, which would be picked in the Shemitah year, but budded in the Shemitah year are going to have sanctity. So here comes the Braita. Ein muslim peirot shvi'it. This is talking about what can you do with fruits that have sanctity to them. You can't send them lo lemishra v'lo lekfusa. You can't give them to be used for, right, or use them yourself. You can't use them for soaking your flax. They would soak it in liquid. You can't use wine, for example, Rashi says, like take wine and soak your flax in wine. And you can't use it for laundering. Apparently, maybe they would use wine somehow for laundering. You can't use it for laundering purposes. This goes back to our original list of the things that you can use it for: eating, drinking, moisturizing, coloring, and light, but not for these other things. But Rabbi Yossi Omer, Muslim, you can use it for laundering and soaking your flax. My time at the Tanakama. So what's the reason? It says it's for you to eat. Eat means eat. It doesn't mean laundering. It doesn't mean soaking your flax. My time at Rabbi Yossi. So what about Rabbi Yossi? It says lachem la'ochla, for you to eat. For you means anything you might need it for. Laundering is one of your basic needs. Soaking your flax is one of your basic needs. I don't know. I don't soak my flax, but obviously in those days they soaked their flax before they spun it into thread. That would be very important. So that's basic need. So he says for any of your needs, including soaking your flax or laundering. So now we're going to see what does each one do with the other. But Tanakama haktiv lachem. What does he do with lachem if not lechol tzorchechem? So he learns it. Now, this is going to be exactly, if you remember, we want to find a Tanaitic source, Tanaitic debate, whether you say what the previous Tana said about lachem le'ochla. Remember, lachem dumia le'ochla. What comes in the context of what's going to have sanctity? It's things that are like eating, which is hanatanu b'yulan shaveh. The benefit happens at the same time that you destroy it. So he comes and says like this. Again, the focus is a little different. There it was what has sanctity. This is what can you use it for, right? Or this is actually just what does he do with the lachem? So the lachem he uses for a different drasha, which is the previous drasha that we learned, which is hahu lachem duya le'ochla misha hanato biyuro shaveh. Now here he's not talking about something, he's saying, what actions could you do, right? It's a little bit different because there we're talking about what would have sanctity. Again, there it was something from a tree, which wasn't a fruit. So it didn't necessarily have sanctity. And the question is, what you're going to do with it, like eating, and then it will have sanctity. This is what action can you do with something that already has sanctity because it's a fruit. What action? So it would have to be dumia la'achila, dumia la'ochla. You can do with it something that's similar to eating. It would have to be that when you benefit from it, you're destroying it. It happens at the same time. But soaking it in flax and using it for laundry, when you benefit, right, the hana'ah comes after you've already used the item, right? The hana'ah is later, right? You've destroyed the wine by putting it in the flax, right? But the flax will be ready. You'll only benefit later. So these are things, and likewise with the laundry. So they're out because of that. And that's how he gets that they're out, right? So that's why you can't use them. So you see here that Tanakama has that drasha, and we're going to see that Rabbi Yossi doesn't. And that's why what we saw before is a machloket Tanaim. What we saw before goes like Tanakama, not like Rabbi Yossi. The Rabbi Yossi, haktiv lo'ochla, what does he do with lo'ochla? Oh, he uses that for something else. It's for eating, not for medicinal purposes. You can't use Shemitah produce that has sanctity to it. According to him, for medicinal purposes, doesn't come to exclude for laundering, comes to exclude for medicinal purposes. He views, right? So his list, Rabbi Yossi's list of eating, drinking, anointing, coloring, and light, which all, by the way, are hana'atan, are at the same time as biuran, but he's going to add to that list also laundering, right? Anything that's a need for a person. So Rabbi Yossi's list of what you could do with Shemitah produce is going to be a lot longer. So now they say Kidditanya. How do we know that Rabbi Yossi uses it for this other drasha? Because this other drasha appears in a braita. Le'ochla v'lo le'melugma. Okay, that's first starts off exactly the same. Can use it for eating, not for medicine. Right, we're going to have to understand why is malugma excluded. So first they say, why wouldn't he get rid of laundering, right? That would be more eating, but don't do your laundry with it. To say eating and not medicine is a bit strange. So they say, well, no, because we already had lachem, any needs you need, that's going to include laundering. Therefore, hamani makayim le'ochla. Le'ochla must be to eliminate something from the list. So le'ochla v'lo le'melugma. So we'll eliminate medicine. To which the Gemara asks whenever we have these kind of drashot, the obvious question, which is, in other words, on the one hand, we have one word that's including lachem. Le'ochla is limiting. So we're going to include laundering and soaking your flax. We're going to exclude medicine. Why? It sounds a little arbitrary. Why would you specifically include the laundry and exclude the medicine? So here comes his answer. This is the answer of the Braita. Laundry is something everybody needs. Medicine, you might need a particular medicine. I don't need that medicine. That's something that's unique for you, for people like you, or for people with similar issue, but it's not something everybody needs. Not everybody needs medicine. Not everybody needs that particular medicine, but laundry, everybody needs to do laundry. It's a basic need of every person. So therefore, as is apparently soaking flax. So, right, if you're making your own clothes. So therefore, we're going to say anything that everybody needs, we're going to allow, right? Because everybody needs clothes, right? Even if you don't necessarily soak your flax, but it's for a need that everybody does need clothing, and everybody needs to launder their clothing. So therefore, we're going to take that one's going to be in, and the one that's not shaveh l'chol adam, motziyat malugma she'ein na shaveh l'chol adam, that most people, right, not everybody needs it in the same way. So that basically showed, again, what did that show? Again, it's a little bit different what it's showing, but the main thing is this drasha. Do we say le'ochla, that lachem le'ochla, lachem is like le'ochla, and the only things that one is allowed to do, and again, it'll only have sanctity if it's not a fruit, right? If you're using it for something that's like eating, right? It's similar to eating in the sense that when you benefit, you're also destroying. That the destruction is at the same time, the benefit comes at the same time as the destruction of the item. That is going to exclude, right? This then wood that you gather or leaves that you gather for burning will be excluded. So that's not part of it. It won't have sanctity. And likewise, fruits that you want to do something with them, that the action does not have the destruction happen at the same time that the benefit happening at the same time you destroy, will also not be an action that's permitted to use Shemitah produce for. So they're two different issues, but they're all connected to the same drasha. Whereas the other opinion doesn't have this drasha, in which case, right, and thinks these things are allowed, which would mean that they might think that burning it would be allowed also, because burning is something everybody needs to cook their food. If burning is allowed, then wood that you collected for burning, if you can burn things that have sanctity, then wood that you collected for burning would also have sanctity, okay, or leaves that you collected for burning would have kedushat shvi'it to them. So therefore, that whole topic of eitzim dahasaka is a machloket tanaim. To finish up this topic, they now say, Man tana lahad tanu Rabbanan. They bring a bright and they say, according to which opinion does this go? Le'ochla v'lo l'melugma, le'ochla v'lo l'ziluf, le'ochla v'lo l'asam mimenu apitosim. So three things that you can't use Shemitah produce for. One is not for medicine. We saw that. Le'ochla v'lo l'ziluf. They would drip some of liquid out, like let's say a liquid that came from a fruit, in order to make a good smell. It's like a air freshener. You can't use Shemitah produce for that. And this is if you ate too much food and something, maybe you have food poisoning and you need to vomit it. So you would drink this apoptosis and it would make you vomit. Okay, so it was also sort of medicinal in nature. So who does this go? According to, obviously, Keman ki Rabbi Yossi. Okay, obviously they knew this was Rabbi Yossi. They're probably asking the question because they want to basically say, maybe they wanted to bring the extra halachot to show what else is like this milugma. Rabbanan, because if you would say Rabbanan, ha'ikanami mishral kfusa, how do we know that this isn't just, maybe Rabbi Tanakama would agree with this, because no, if it was Tanakama, he would have added to the list the obvious of, and don't launder with them, and don't soak your flax with them, and they're not listed here, so it must be it's not the rabbis. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going to have a different machloket. This will take us not only till the end of the daf, but into tomorrow's daf. We have a machloket Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, okay, two Amoraim. So now we're going to see what's the machloket. The machloket is about when we talked about the Shemitah, the produce of the Shemitah, when I buy Shemitah produce in a way that I'm allowed to, or even if I'm not allowed to, the money has sanctity to it. Now the fruits, normally when we talk about moving sanctity onto an item, and we usually use the language of chilul, lechalel, to take away the sanctity. So usually it's, let's say, Maaser Sheni. I have fruits that are supposed to go to Jerusalem, but I can't schlep them to Jerusalem. So I move the sanctity onto a coin. The original fruits become chulin, as we say. They're no longer sanctified. The money gets the sanctity, and I use that and I go buy in Jerusalem. And then, again, when I spend the money, the sanctity leaves the money, goes on to the fruits. With Shemitah, it doesn't work that way because the money stays on the sanctity stays on the fruits, and it also is transferred to the money. So now the question is, in what ways does this work? So Amar Rabbi Elazar, Ein shvi mitchalelet ele derech mekach. The sanctity moves on to coins only in a sale, which is the case we were discussing. We'll see in a minute what the other opinion is. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. I could do it the same way I do Maaser Sheni. I could say, I want the sanctity of the Shemitah produce to go onto these coins. Now, it would be a little different than Maaser Sheni. I don't know why I would do this, because in that case, if I do it, what's going to happen? The money will be sanctified. Also, the fruits will be sanctified. So I'll end up with sanctification of both, which is a little bit difficult because, again, what happens if the money is sanctified? I have to use it only for whatever ways I can use Shemitah produce, as we listed before, and we saw there's a bit of a debate about it. Number two, when there's no longer those fruits of the field, let's say I bought lemons. So the money that I gave the seller for the lemons, when these lemons are no longer on the tree, the seller who has the money now has to make sure to have used that money before the lemons, right? He has to make sure to spend that money before the lemons are no longer on the tree, before it's mambi, or otherwise he has to destroy them. They can't be used anymore. So it's a bit of a pain, right? So now comes Rabbi Yochanan and he says, but it can bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul. It can also be done in the same way that you would use maaser sheni. So my time at Rabbi Elazar, what's his reason? Now we're going to get to the psukim. Dichtiv. Okay, it says in Vayikra Kafeh. Okay, in Vayikra Kafeh it talks about Yovel, which is the Jubilee year, which has the same laws of Shemitah. If you look in Pasuk Yubet and Yugimel, it says Ki Yovel Hi. Okay, first of all, it says you can't plant, you can't harvest. That was in Pasuk Yud Aleph. Yubet it says Ki Yovel Hi, because this is the Yovel Kodesh Shia Lachem. It will be a year sanctified to you. Min hasadeh tochlu tfuata. You will only eat the grains from the fields, meaning gather your own stuff and eat. That's it. You can't go buying, selling, planting, etc. Plant, right? Eat whatever just happens to grow. And then it says, in the Jubilee year, then there's a unique halacha, which is all the land goes back to its original owner. Again, not all, that's all depending on what kind of land, which whatever, most of it goes back. And then the next pasuk is a new topic, which is kitim kerumim karla mitecha, when you sell something to a friend, o kanomi mitecha, or you buy, al tonu ishit achiv, don't do what's called ona'ah, which is abuse someone, take too much money, pay too little money, anything like that. So this is what we call smichut parshiyot, where we're going to darshan two things that appear next to each other, we can learn something. So comes Rabbi Elazar, what's his reason? It says, B'shnata Yovel Azot, B'samich le b'chitim kerumim karla mitecha, right? In that Yovel year, you can't work your land. And then it says, and you might, right? And when you sell, derech mekach v'lo derech chilul. So what does he learn, Rabbi Elazar? It must be that Yovel, right, the sanctity of the Yovel year on produce can only be moved, right? There's obviously not really what it says here, but it's a drasha. The smichut tells you only through a sale, because it says right after kitim keru, when you sell. For Rabbi Yochanan, my time, what's his reason why he thinks mekach or chilul? Dichtiv ki yovel, right, which means redeeming it on your own, not through a sale. Ki yovel hi kodesh, ma kodesh bein derech mekach bein derech chilul, ashvi'it bein derech mekach bein derech chilul. Just like kodesh, you can move sanctity, right? Let's say I say my couch is going to the temple. I'm sanctifying it to the temple. I don't bring it to the temple. What do? I redeem it onto money, and I bring the money gets sanctified, and I bring that to the temple. Maaser sheni, same thing. It's also sanctified, and I redeem it on a coin. So since it says Yovel is Kodesh, uses the same language as by other places that are Kodesh, just like Kodesh can be moved onto a coin through redemption, not just through a sale. Likewise, Shemitah. So now we're going to go back and say, what does each one do with the other? So smichut parshiot, it's interesting. You might say he just doesn't darshan the connection between these two things. But no, they assume he does. So Rabbi Yochanan, hai kitim kerumim karmai avidle. What does he do with the fact that that's juxtaposed to the Jubilee year? He says, by the way, the Jubilee year, just so I make it clear, in case you don't know, the 50th year, we have Shemitah cycles. We have 7 Shemitah cycles. At the end of the 7th Shemitah cycle, year 49 is a Shemitah year. Year 50 is a Jubilee year. You end up with 2 years that you don't work the land. Okay, because all the laws of Shemitah apply to Yovel, and in addition, there's other laws which again equalize everybody, that we turn, right? Everybody gets their land back, right? There's sort of this equality of all human beings. Okay, that's why nobody works their land. Everyone's equal. Everything is hefker, ownerless. Everyone can take from everyone, wherever they see. It's this kind of equalizing year, the Shemitah in general, and then the Yovel is all the more so. So now. Right, it's when slaves go free. Remember, every 7 years a slave goes free, not connected to Shemitah. That's just if you Jewish slave works for you for 6 years, 7th year he goes free. But if he wants to stay, he pierces his ear, and then he can stay with you. But he has to leave in the Jubilee year also. It's again this equalizing year. So now he says, what's the connection? He uses it for this drasha, Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, Detanya, as it says, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Not only laws of Shvi'it, like planting and plowing and all that, are forbidden, but even less significant things of Shemitah are so serious. like, for example, selling your produce, which doesn't say in the Torah, but it is forbidden. Again, we saw there are certain ways it can be done. Adam noseh v'noten b'peirot shvi'i. If you do that, if you sell, which is avak, avak always means dust. It means something like part of the forbidden, but not like the major forbidden part. So what do we learn? If you sell your Shemitah produce, lasaf mocher metaltalav et kelav. Sales in the Torah are always seen as you need money desperately, so you have to sell your stuff. You wouldn't sell your stuff if you don't need money. So what will happen to you if you start trying to make money off the Shemitah year? You will end up having to sell your possessions. You're not going to basically benefit financially from it. It's almost like a threat. This is what's going to happen to you. As it says, everybody will go back to his original place. And then, right, in the Jubilee year, meaning just in general, the Jubilee year, so he darshans it for this different drasha. He uses it for a different drasha that's found in a Braita that basically talks about the connection. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says the reason is for these two things to be juxtaposed to teach you, if you don't keep the laws of Yovel and even do minor things like selling the produce, you will end up needing money desperately and have to sell your possessions. Okay. So now what we saw, Rabbi Elazar says, Bein derech mekach, bein derech chilul, right? And he learned, Rabbi Elazar says only derech mekach, and he learns that from chitim keru. Rabbi Yochanan learns it could be anyway from kodesh it's kodesh, right? Ki yovel hi kodesh, right? That it's sanctified. It's like anything that's sanctified, can be redeemed, right? Or moved on. The sanctity can move on to other things the same way other sanctified items could, which is mekach or chilul. Then we said, what does Rabbi Yochanan do with Rabbi Elazar's smichut? Oh, he uses it for some other thing, right? Which is punishment, kind of what will happen to you, threat tactics. But Rabbi Elazar, now we have some high crowd to Rabbi Yochanan. What does he do with this kodesh? He needs it for the following bright. Ki yovel hi kodesh. Here it goes. Ma kodesh tofes et amav, ashvi tofes et amad. Just like sanctity goes on the money in general, like we said, right? If I redeem it onto money, I can redeem it onto money. Likewise, shvi'it also gets moved onto money. Now, again, in a different way, because it doesn't get moved, it gets also placed on the money and also on the shvi'it. But it also goes on money, meaning if I buy Shemitah produce, right, that money will have sanctity. So now they're going to bring, that's what he does with this word kodesh. So now we're going to bring a bright to prove Tanya Kabatei to Rabbi Elazar, Tanya Kabatei to Rabbi Yochanan. That'll be the end of today. And then we'll move on to other things connected with this. Tomorrow we'll continue on in this sugya. But right now we're going to bring two bright. So again, Rabbi Elazar says only through a sale. So here comes the bright. Tanya Kabatei to Rabbi Elazar. Shvi'it tofeset et ameha, exactly what we just ended with. Shvi'it, right, goes on the money. Shenema, how do we know? Because it says ki yovel hi kodesh yelachem. That was the exact rasha Rabbi Elazar just said, but we haven't yet gotten to how we get that. It's only through a sale. We'll get to that later in the Braita. Ma kodesh tofeset ama v'asur, ashvi tofeset et dameha v'asura. Just like a sanctified item can move on to the money, likewise, shvi'it, the sanctity of shvi'it, can be passed on to the money. So then they ask the obvious question, which I've been kind of saying all along as a fact, but not really saying why is this a fact. But if it's going to be like sanctified items, what happens? The sanctity moves from the sanctified item to the money, and it's no longer, like we said about Maaser Sheni, for example. When you bring it to Jerusalem, right, you're going to first remove the sanctity from the fruits, put them on the coin, then your fruits are no longer sanctified. You can eat them not necessarily in Jerusalem, anywhere you want. The money now has the sanctity. So why wouldn't you say it's the same thing for shvi'it, right? Av shvi'it, tofeset ameb, yotzei l'chulin. Should also be removed from the Shemitah produce and moved onto the money. Talmud loma tihiyeh. It says, ki yovel hi kodesh tihiyeh. It will be sanctified. It will be. That means it will stay in its state of being. B'havayatate. It will stay in that state forever. Ha-ketzad. So how exactly does this work? And here's the part that proves Rabbi Elazar. Lakach beperot shvi'it basar. If you bought from Shemitah produce meat, right? You did a barter system. I gave you meat, you gave me your produce. What happens? The meat, right, is going to have the sanctity. Elu ve'elu mitba'arim b'shvi'it. Both of them will have to be destroyed by the time the fruits are no longer out in the fields. Lakach babasar dagim. Now it goes along. What if I now take that meat, right? We didn't talk about this before, but now the meat has sanctity. Okay. So I now take that meat and I buy with it fish. Okay. Yatsa basar v'nechnesu dagim. Okay. So now the meat no longer has sanctity. At that point, right, what we call pre-sheni, the second level, right? The first level is the fruit itself. That the sanctity can't be removed. But the meat, which only has sanctity because of the fruits, that can be removed and moved on to the next item. Yatsa basar v'nechnesu dagim, and then the fish gets the sanctity. Lakach b'dagim yain. If I now take that fish, right? They're just kind of showing how extreme this is. If I take that fish and I buy wine, yatsu dagim v'nechnas yain. So now the dagim, the fish, no longer have sanctity. The wine has sanctity. Lakach b'yain shemen. Yatsa yain v'nechnas shemen. Now I buy oil with that wine. The shemen, the oil has sanctity. The wine does not. Now notice it priatzmo asul. Okay, sorry, I skipped the line. So how does this work? The right to ends. The very last item has the sanctity. But the original fruit always has sanctity. So what do you see here? Notice they gave all these examples of going on forever, but each example they gave was about purchasing. So it must be only through purchasing and not through redeeming. Okay, now, Tani Kavatei de Rabbi Yochanan. Now we're going to have a bride to support Rabbi Yochanan. It's not 100% clear how this works. I'll give you one of the proofs, one of the explanations in the commentaries. Rashi will say this. Whether it's Shvi'it or whether it's Maser Sheni, even though we know it's a little different for each one, you can redeem it onto an animal or any kind of animal, domesticated, non-domesticated, and a bird. Whether they're alive or whether they're dead, it can be redeemed onto an animal. Divrei Rabbi Meir. You can't redeem it onto a live animal. Why is that? Both maaser, there's what's called biur maasrot, it has to be destroyed at a certain point, and also at the end of the year, and also the shmita. Anything with kedushat shvit has to be destroyed at the end of whenever there's no more of those fruits growing in the fields. If we put it onto live animals, what's the problem? I might want to grow more animals. Animals we use, right, both for slaughtering and eating, right? The best thing would be, okay, move it onto an animal, slaughter the animal and eat it before Zman Biur. But I might not do that because I'll want to keep the animal so the animal can reproduce. If that's the case, then we don't allow me to do that according to the rabbis because we're worried I might leave it around and then what will happen? I'll leave it beyond the Zman Biur, and that's a problem. I have to destroy it before that, or, slaughter it and eat it before that. So therefore, we don't allow it because of this gzera. What was the proof, though? The proof, Rashi says, mitchalalim mashma derech chilu b'ptiya v'lo b'mekach u'menkar. It doesn't say you buy. It says you chilul. Chilul is generally redeeming without a sale. So it sounds like, right, they're discussing whether you can or whether you can't, but the point is, for sure you can do it on dead animals, according to both, and it sounds like chilul, that it would move, the sanctity would move to the animal, even if you wasn't through a sale. So that seems to prove Rabbi Yochanan. With that, we'll finish today. As I promised, tomorrow we will continue on with this issue and into more questions about, first of all, this Braita and about the animals, and then we'll get into some other things. And then we'll move on to Lulav in the Mikdash versus Lulav once the temple was destroyed. What was the difference in the time of the Mikdash? What was the difference in the temple and outside the temple? And then what did Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai introduce once the temple was destroyed? That we'll finish for today. Have a great day, everyone.